Hello and welcome to Strand 4, the session where we'll be focusing on policy. What does progress in transformative education look like? My name is Sam Loni. I'm a program director at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and I'm director of the Global Schools Program. It's an absolute pleasure being here with you at this UNESCO conference. In this session, we'll be looking at the transformative education for sustainable development, global citizenship, and health and well-being, as you all well know, enshrined in Target 4.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals, and is often still considered as marginal issues in education policies in many countries in relation to the emphasis placed on education access. In this session, we'll be looking at synergies and complementarities of these thematic areas, which yet need to be explored further to ensure that they're integrated into education policy. But given the importance of such challenges as climate change and discrimination and conflict, physical and mental health problems that threaten the very foundations of our societies, there is an urgent need for education systems, in particular education policies, to address these urgent matters more holistically and more centrally. And this session will recapture the ideas that were discussed from day 1 and 2 and discuss the way forward. And so we will now introduce you to our wonderful panelists. Our first panelist is Sandra, Allison, Soria, Mendoza, who is the head of environmental education unit and environmental education. She's also an environmental education specialist at the Ministry of Education of Peru. And then we will have Catherine Matara, who is the Assistant Director of Education for the Ministry of Education of Kenya. And then finally, we'll have our wonderful youth advocate, who's Saher Rashid Baig, who is a youth advocate for climate, ocean, gender, and human rights in the and is also a younger lead on COP25 Intergovernmental Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action. We have a wonderful panel, and we're very much looking forward to the discussion with them. I will just quickly outline the format before we go on. I will be doing a quick recap from the previous session, and then I will put the question, a quick recap from the previous session. I'll put the question to the panelists. Then we have this a wonderful feature using Slido where you can all weigh in and share your thoughts on the specifics of the session. And then we'll have a 15-minute discussion, and then we'll repeat that for question 2. So each panelist will speak for roughly 2 minutes, and then we'll get straight to it. And as you're aware, really the objective of this session, our aim is really to have a few concrete policy recommendations. And firstly, what can countries do to promote transformative education? And secondly, how can we create enabling conditions for transformative education? So really, this is for us to put things into perspective and to really come up with a few specific policy recommendations that we can work on. And now I will do a quick review of the previous session notes. As a summary, there was a slider cloud that was essentially used, and this will hopefully help put matters into context. So if I can just have previous sessions slider notes on the presentation, please. There we go. So this is this is essentially a summary of the previous session, and the question that was put was, what needs to be transformed in education policies? And as you can see, really values take center stage there, but also lots of different components as well, which is for that education to be adaptive, there needs to be a trust in teachers, inclusion, flexibility, and for the education to be non-prescriptive. There's one there I really like and I can relate to, which is less testing. the mindsets, and another really big one is youth participation. So we can see, you know, a variety of perspectives, but all with a common feature of quite a new look at the education system. So that is to really help us and the panelists put the issue into context. But now I'd like to go forward and get the panelists to react. And I guess, which goes to my first question, and I would like to first go to Sandra, then Catherine, and then Saher, which is, what are the concrete policy recommendations for countries to advance transformative education for sustainable development, or, you know, global, which includes global citizenship and health and well-being? So with that, we'll get started with Sandra. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días desde Perú.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello from Peru. Hello. So the keywords that we just saw were quite significant. And I think that each country is working hard to come up with policy documents and to also come up with declarations so that they enable sustainable development. And transformative education should be based on reality and real-life settings. And that's how we should design our education and educational settings. And all the educational process should engage all different stakeholders. And that should be turned into reality, and it should be put into documents. So I would like to briefly talk about the experience in Peru. So the participation process is key in Peru. And that is because each stakeholder has their own sets of needs and ideas and concerns, and we need to be open to their feedback to bring transformative education, and we have to put that into document as well.
Thank you very much for that. I will now hand over to our next speaker, Catherine.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. In order for us to embrace transformative education in education for sustainable development, there's need to embrace a value-based education system which can encourage the learners to embrace values in their lives so that they can avoid, or rather they can avoid sustainable lifestyles and a sustainable education form of system. There's also need to embrace flexibility in the education system. This can be done through acquisition or education through integration of ICT in the system, through the use of various technology systems, and that can enable them to reach out to many learners. There's also need to bring on board inclusion so that the learners with special needs and disability are not left out. Finally, then there's need to come up with an education system that will involve the youth, who form the bulk of the society, especially in Africa, so that they can embrace sustainable lifestyles and education for sustainable development. And besides, there's also need to come up with an education system that will enable learners to solve their issues, to solve conflicts, an education system that will embrace gender equity so that all the learners are brought on board, an education system with enabling learning conditions so that learners are able to learn in a clean environment, in an environment that reflects on their social values, and even economic values. Besides, then there's need to come up with a curriculum that is value-based and that caters for peace education and sustainable lifestyles. And by so doing, when we have such a transformative form of education, then we are able to reach out to majority of the learners, and we are able to turn around the environment and to turn around the world eventually. This education system then will have an holistic approach, which is more of a whole school approach as opposed to the other systems that we have around. In Kenya, for instance, we are into a competence-based curriculum that will enable the learners to acquire competences that can enable them to solve problems in life. For example, the issues that are now coming up as a result of climate change. An education system that is value-based, that the learners are able to have innate values in them, and also that should be reflected in the society. That's what we are doing in Kenya, and with that now we have various aspects of sustainable education for sustainable development and peace education already embraced in the curriculum. For example, global citizenship education is already integrated in the curriculum. We also have issues of climate change integrated in the curriculum. We also have education for sustainable development integrated in the curriculum. And moving forward then, we can talk of a transformative form of education with those aspects put on board. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's a wonderful set of recommendations. And with that, I would like to now hand over to Saher Baig for her thoughts on this.
Thanks, Sam. Super happy to be here, and thank you so much for all the great inputs that I heard on policy. Definitely agreed with all the inputs put forward on value-based education system. I would just want to start off by citing the 1.2.9 clause of the Youth for Climate Manifesto, which comes under the capacity building section, which says that ensure the implementation of capacity building and transformative education through a multidisciplinary approach by integrating a climate education program in national curricula from an early age, supported by all relevant ministries and institutions. Now, building more on this, I just think as a young person that we have been working a lot in silos when we talk about sustainable development, when we talk about education and climate change, when we talk about these different, so for example, well-being, for example, global citizenship, for example, green jobs or whatever, right? I just think as an individual that a concrete implementable policy to achieve sustainable development should be the one that includes all the areas where the silos do not exist anymore. So for example, from an early age, so for example, the elementary schoolers and the high schoolers are taught what well-being and sustainable development means. We are actually telling them what being a global citizen actually means. And we're not doing it focused on climate change only, and we're not doing it focused on environmental policies only. Given the fact that this is super crucial, this is not achievable without addressing the cross-cutting topics. This is how I see it. I just think that coming together, another crucial part of this clause is that we all have to be promoting value-based education, not just as education ministry, but also all relevant ministries and institutions. I think that all ministries should be coming together to be promoting this policy to make it more implementable and more efficient, where when actually sustainable, or when actually children and young people were identified as the major group in the Rio Earth Summit, it said nowhere that you just have to promote climate education. It said nowhere that you just have to promote one part focused on children and young people, but it identified the children and young people as a major group in the whole sustainable development area. What I'm trying to convey here is that if we want to actually achieve sustainable development, we cannot afford to leave behind our children and young people from the school, the ones that are studying right now at schools, without teaching them how health, well-being, good governance is very cross-cutting to
Right.
sustainable development and to climate education. I think I'm over my time, but this is my policy idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some wonderful reactions from participatory education to integrating flexibility, gender equity, and building that into the curriculum, and having a value-based education system, to breaking the silos and implementing a more holistic and more comprehensive education system with young people and children at the center of it. So some wonderful suggestions. But before we go into our 15-minute slot for discussions, I would like to encourage the audience to also participate, to put their suggestions, questions through Slido. So if we can please through, yep, there we go. So this is the Slido slide. So if we can actually ask the audience for the next 2 minutes or so to please go on there and to contribute to the discussions and to put their suggestions on the slides. And we'll be able to actually open that up to the panelists in a minute and get them to react. So we'll give that about a minute. So those are the numbers. So slido.com. Yeah, there we go. We've got some success there. Alternative assessment. Great. Okay. As we wait for, okay, so some scale good practices, as these suggestions are trickling in, what I would like to do is to ask our panelists to react, of course, to these as they come in, but also I would like to maybe push our panelists a little bit and say the suggestions that you've provided are fantastic, but how do we actually embed that into a policy recommendation or a policy mechanism? And you know, how do we actually put it into practice once in policy? And I'm not talking about what is already there, but what needs to be done as kind of the next step. So with that, I would like to just open the floor for that discussion, starting with Sandra, and then Catherine, and then Saher.
Gracias. Es interesante.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's quite interesting to see all the different keywords on Slido, because we can feel the energy for youth participation. Also, they are talking about the need for institutional participation, as well as the participation of the civil society and the citizens. So my impression is that we need to co-work together. And what enables that is citizen participation tools. We must provide tools that encourage citizen participation. And I think the ideal tool is school, because schools engage a number of stakeholders on a daily basis. And for our students, well, we have to really look at the concept of comprehensive and holistic approach. At the same time, I was able to feel the energy, as I said, and my impression is that we need to work harder on these aspects. So to adopt these innovative ideas, we need participation and put them into action. So we need the right environment and the space to facilitate that. And by doing so, I believe that we will be able to apply transformative education into our education policies. So the policy should be able to reflect transformative education. So for instance, I'm a practitioner, and at the same time, we have public servants from the Ministry of Education or other educational offices, and we also need to work jointly with those people. And in that sense, we also need to be comprehensive and holistic. And these are some ideas and elements that transformative education should reflect.
Great, great. Thank you very much for your thoughts on that. And now I would like to just ask Catherine to just react briefly to this, and then we'll go to some questions from the panelists. And of course, Saher, and then we'll go to some questions from the panelists. Catherine.
Thank you. Now, like we said, in having or moving towards a transformative form of education, we need to come up with policies or solutions that will enable our learners to have critical thinking about perspectives in life, about problems facing us, about challenges facing us with regards to conflicts and even climate, or with regards to education for sustainable development. So we need to come up with ideas that will enable our learners to have an open mind, to be able to critically think and come up with solutions that affect us in society. And now that you said we should not talk about what we are doing, then for example, we need to scale up the use of technology. We need to embrace technology so that we come up with innovative ways of solving our problems in the society. Through doing that, then we are able to transform our society, and that's then what we'll talk about when you are speaking of transformative education. And again, like I mentioned, for Kenya, we are moving to the value-based education system, which then we need to continue building capacity on the educators and even curriculum developers, so that that can go down to the level of the students and eventually to everyone in the society. And by so doing, we'll have a society that embraces values, that embraces positive mentality, and by so doing, we'll be able to have transformative form of education. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those suggestions. And now, Saher.
Yeah, I just have 2 points which I can cover real quick. So I really like the point of having technology, but and of having innovation from the policymakers. But I just want to highlight here that a lot of the times having these digital contingencies means leaving behind the vulnerable, marginalized, and indigenous communities, leaving behind people who do not have capacities to at the first place use these technologies, right? Because that capacity building is needed at the first place. So I think that this is a great idea, and in order to transform the whole system, I mean, this is great that we will be using innovation, but I think that should not be limited to technology only. And when we are trying to basically use technology, it should be inclusive of our, we cannot afford to leave behind our vulnerable, marginalized, and indigenous communities. The other point that I want to just speak on to make it more implementable is the youth participation. The young people are in the system. They are the one who are studying right now. The decision makers, no matter how good they think of us, they should listen what the people who are studying right now at the school want to see, want to learn. So I think that the whole system should be consultative in that way. And it's actually easy because the young people today in schools facing the climate anxiety, facing the mental health and well-being issues, they are the ones you're talking about. They are the ones you want to make the good global citizens out of, right? So I think that these voices are crucial to be amplified and heard to if you want to actually make these policies implementable. Else, I think these will be, at the end of the day, these will be just empty commitments and good words. It's really crucial if you want to move forward to listen to these voices and be actually real to what we're saying.
Great, thank you so much for that, Saher. Catherine, can I actually ask you to please react to the point about technology, that technology is great, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to solve some of the more systematic issues, and it also doesn't necessarily provide access to some of the marginalized groups.
Exactly, that is very true. But when I talk of embracing technology, it doesn't mean that we are going to do away with the other forms of reaching out to the learners. Technology, we might not be able to reach out to everybody because we take cognizance of those in the marginalized areas where there is no internet or there is no reach to the technology equipment. But what I'm saying, technology can have a multiple effect. We have these other ways of reaching out to the learners, which I can call the usual approaches through teaching and learning, but we can also use technology for a multiple effect so that we can reach out to every other person. In technology, I'm not talking about the computers and the internet, but we can also use other means of technology like radios, and we are able to reach out to more people, television, and other issues. For example, bearing in mind that we are in the COVID era and slowly moving out from the COVID-19 pandemic, we realize that in life we cannot do without technology. And there's need then for us to embrace more of technology, but notwithstanding, or we shouldn't do away with the old methods of reaching out to the learners, but it's good to embrace technology so that we have a multiple effect. And when I talk of technology, I know most people will think about the internet, computer, and all that. But in essence, I'm talking about other even old ways of reaching out to learners, but we are able to reach out to them, for example, through the radio, through the television, and such like ways.
No, great, thank you very much. We actually have a question for Sandra from the audience. So the question says, in Peru, when and how can articulated and decentralized participation be accessed, where they will be able to collect the diverse opinions and concerns for a transformative education? Essentially, how do you actually build in that participation into the policy?
Thank you. Efectivamente,
Yes, thank you very much for that question. So in Peru, I don't think the country is different from other countries. So we have a number of countries who have participated in this forum, and I think we share many similarities. We have connectivity gap, which is still huge, and we still have a long way to go in many other aspects. However, still, because of the pandemic, we were able to understand the dire need of technology. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the use of the digital technology. So the ministry, the relevant ministry, as well as different agencies requested the need for technology. So when it comes to education in Peru, remote learning was facilitated by the government, and students were able to use the virtual space, and but as you said, well, there is still some connectivity gap, as I mentioned, so we had to come up with other solutions as well. For instance, there is this concept of community learning. So students were able to learn in community centers and not from homes. And that was just one option that the country provided to the students to ensure access to education so that students do not give up on their learning. And given that context, the different regions, of course, they do have discrepancy in terms of advances in technology. However, the country understood that and recognized that.
Great, great. Thank you very much. I would now like to ask the panelists to please react to the some of the content on the Slido slides, and perhaps to basically share your thoughts on some of the themes. And for that, Saher, may I go to you first, if you have any particular thoughts on the inputs on Slido.
I actually just expressed my how I feel about the youth participation. I think because I just think that the young people basically, they're, at least in my experience, they're organizing these some capacity buildings for each other so that we can learn from each other and amplify the voices that are newly coming to the space. What we cannot oversee is that these new voices are coming from the education sector as well. So I mean, if the governments, or like if the policymakers at the first place can just consider what we have to say, for example, or what we are looking for, and we can build more meaningful bridges between the policymakers and the young people who are organizing, for example, the civil societies, right? It's certain, like integrating the civil societies. This is exactly what I'm trying to say, because the young people also come into that, but also a lot of the other civil societies that are doing a lot of great work focused on young people, on taking their voices into account when they are giving these these capacity buildings. I think that can be a great way of transforming the education, as the topic goes. I think one of the other point is what I will be trying to say is that I think somebody also mentioned it. I think that this should be very relevant to how we can actually solve the real life crises that are going on, just as I mentioned on the well-being, climate anxiety, and what people are going through every day, I think. And it also, for me, the whole institution approach, moving forward towards an inclusive, sustainable development for children and young people, it's super crucial that we're not working in silos. I think that this is what also something that I talked about. So I think that these are the few great points, but I also want to highlight that we should not be overseeing what have already been done by the young people. For example, on the nationally determined contributions, right? A lot of the countries, a lot of the African countries are doing great work by taking these voices in account of their young people when they are working on the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, coming up with integrating them into real policies and implementing them as well. So I think that the young people have that energy which we can utilize. A lot of great work have been happening. What we need to do is that we need to just be less. We need to kind of drop down our egos and be open to more suggestions, be open to more partnerships. And we don't have to think like, hey, these young people don't know enough. I think that a lot of good practices are being happening in this space. We just need to focus on them and learn from each other and give each other a chance to be a part of this transformation. This is what I think.
Thank you very much, Saher. And this is actually a great gateway to our next section, where we talk about the enabling policies. And I would actually like to encourage the audience to continue to contribute, to post questions, to post on Slido, as we will be actually taking these and making sure that we're reflecting on it post-conference, and to see how the conference outcomes can be integrated into real change. So with that, we would like to go to the next question for our wonderful panelists. And again, I would like to ask each of you, starting with Sandra and then Catherine, then Saher, to react to this, and then we'll again go for another 15-minute discussion and Slido reactions. So what are the concrete policy recommendations for specifically enabling, creating enabling conditions and engaging key stakeholders? We have talked to some extent about this, but what are the very specific concrete policy recommendations for providing those conditions? So if we can go to Sandra and then Catherine and Saher.
Gracias.
Yes, thank you very much. So that was a very interesting question because in Peru, we actually are taking different approaches and testing different ideas. The government of Peru cannot act alone, and it needs the help of others. It means that it relies on the participation of other stakeholders, including the civil society. And we also need different governance systems and institutions. At the same time, we also need to rely on key stakeholders to work together. So it's a team effort. And we need to work together to achieve a more ambitious goal relating to SDG. So school is key to achieving that. And learning takes place in schools. It's the very place where learning takes place. If we look at the curriculum, it includes all the different competencies, and in the process of developing learning, the different competencies, the educational plans are embodied in the curriculum, and curriculum provides an holistic view. Also, the learning environment should be safe, healthy, and it should be for everybody. Everybody should have fair access to the environment, and that is the precondition. So we need various participation of fields, actors, and experts who should come together in this space called school to come up with a national educational policy and plans. And I think that is key. So it takes more than the government to come up with plans. And Peru has a large land size, and while different regions have different needs, and we need a holistic approach to cater to the needs of the different regions, and that will be key to achieving SDG goals. And by doing so, students will be able to learn better and participate better. We can induce such an environment, and also we can encourage students engage in different activities. At the same time, we can encourage them and motivate them to take action. And that's the recommendation that I would like to make. In other words, we need different stakeholders and actors across different disciplines and fields that reflect different realities when coming up with plans.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Catherine, can I ask you to now react to that question as well, please?
Okay, thank you very much. One of the ways to deal with the issues that are coming up is to embrace a multi-sectoral approach in dealing with our issues, because we all understand that education is an enabler to various issues that are affecting the society and even problems that come up in the society that is socially, economically, and even politically. And therefore, education being an enabler, there is need then to embrace a multi-sectoral approach where we bring all the stakeholders on board to enable us to transform or come up with ways of dealing with issues affecting us. Besides, we need to establish collaboration and linkages, partnerships with the different organizations, with the different institutions, so that we can have a common front. And by so doing, I believe we'll have an aspect of transformative education, notwithstanding that there is need to have participatory learning. The youth, like I mentioned earlier, or the children we have in the society, form the bulk of the population in most countries. And therefore, there is need then for these youth voices to be heard. There is need to come up with a policy direction where we can have youth participation in various sectors, the children participating in various issues, coming up with ideas, and you will be surprised that they will come up with very many innovative ways of dealing with issues affecting society. But apart from that, we need to change the mindset. And like I mentioned, education being an enabler. So who is this who is leading the process? Who is the driver? It is the teacher. And therefore, we need to capacity build the instructors, the teachers, the lecturers at various levels, so that they can be able to inculcate what we are talking about: the critical thinking aspect, the participatory aspect, the transformative pedagogy, so that we all together embrace and move in one direction, such that we are able to think now critically and move out of our usual cocoons or silos, and we move out and reach out to many people in the society. That's my take.
Thank you very much. Saher?
Yes. It just feels like I have a very different perspective on this whole thing, but I'm super happy to actually share that. I just think that the whole education, the whole notion of education, as I see it, it does not happen in classrooms only in most of the countries, because most of the young people or children do not have the privilege to go to schools and attend classes. Homeschooling is a very widespread thing that is happening at the moment. Also, we cannot oversee the value of our indigenous people and their knowledge that they have. Now, this whole sector, I mean, none of us would disagree that education in most of the countries and for the most of us is a question of privilege. How as a young person, the policy that I want to see should be including these people who are doing homeschooling, should be including the indigenous people, their knowledge, and should be building upon that. And this cannot happen if we won't remove the language gates that we have. So I think that while making the policies and enabling the conditions to engage more the key stakeholders, I think that we have to recognize where the key stakeholders are. These are not only the civil societies, for example, that are existing, not only the people, the children and young people who are going to schools right now, but a lot of children and young people who do not have the privilege to go to schools or have, for example, safety risks to actually attain the education or be a part of that education system. We cannot be like, it would be just so unfair for me to be a young person sitting in front of me using this opportunity and focusing just on people who are going to school, attending classes. I was really privileged that I got to do it as a child. But I recognize that a lot of young people and children do not have the same privilege. And I just want to say how these language gates are making us to to adopt this outdated approach, I think, right? So I just want to say that. And what I also want to say from Catherine's intervention, I really love the point that they really want to be focused on teachers' capacity building. What I want to see as a young person is that we also adopt the whole concept of intergeneration equity in the teaching sector. By that I also mean that we should be making maybe more jobs for the young teachers and young people who have been attending these schools, who have been through these environments. We should be making the whole teaching environment more friendly for them, so that the people who are leaving the process, give them the capacity, and then these young people will then lead the teaching process, because these are the people who know what they went through as a young person in the whole education system. And I think that this is a very good tool towards transforming the whole system, if you want to not just talk about it, but also want to do something, achieve something efficiently. So I think that building, yeah, so this is what I think. Thanks for stopping me right on time, everyone.
No. Thank you very much, wonderful panelists, for your reactions and comments and perspectives. We'll now go to Slido, and once again I would like to ask our wonderful audience to weigh in and share your thoughts. So you can do it either through scanning and putting in that code. So I'll just allow that for a second, and then I think we're going to go to the next slide, where the information is there. So if you go to, I believe it's slido.com, and put in that code, you'll be able to contribute. So we'd like to encourage our audience to do this as we continue the discussion. Now we have a question from the floor for Sandra and Catherine, and I would just like to put these to you to react to, first Sandra and then Catherine. And the question says, I would like to hear more from speakers about practical implementation of these ideas, and particularly in the role of ministries in creating these enabling transformations on the ground. What are the real practical changes that we can implement? Sandra and then Catherine.
Claro que sí.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It's a challenge. And well, actually providing an answer is not easy, because the Ministry of Education of Peru looks at different approaches and angles and conducts different activities. And the different educational levels should be considered. And this space called school is not just a physical space. And of course, we not only need to encompass formal, but also informal and non-formal education. And schools must include all. And the Ministry of Education should not lose sight of this, and must make sure that intergenerational knowledge sharing is completed. And in that process, the teachers should be empowered so that they can teach students better. And at the same time, the teachers need to develop and reinforce their competencies. And that's the priority of the Ministry of Education. At the same time, students must know that realities are different. And they have to be aware of the different local contexts, so that the ministry also attempts to adopt different policies tailored to different needs. So all the different stakeholders must utilize the knowledge that the country has accumulated For example, there is a subject called the time of the environment, and teachers who are expert on the environment are asked and required to provide education on this subject. And real-life examples will be presented in the classroom, and innovative ideas are also presented.
Thank you very much. Catherine?
Thank you so much. Now, one of the ways is through creating an enabling learning environment so that learners are able to interact with one another. Learners are able to play, because play is very, very important. Learners are able to engage through participatory activities. So creating an enabling environment in the learning areas is very, very critical. Another way is through participation of the various stakeholders, meaning we have to bring on board the parents and even the community at large so that they're able to understand the learners and their needs. Another way is involving the learners in decision making, in policy making, such that we have their views about certain opinions. That is very, very critical, because these policies, at the end of the day, will have a ripple effect on the learners and the stakeholders at large. So it's good to get their views, involving the learners in leadership. They are able to come up with their own leaders. And at the end of the day, they are able to contribute positively in the society. Besides, it is not also very good to ignore their needs and concerns. And that is why they should always be brought on board to come up with ideas, to come up with solutions to problems affecting us. Besides, I still insist that there's need also to embrace technology so that we can deal with various issues affecting us. So in any policy direction, it's important to take into consideration the issues that I've mentioned. Learning environment for the learners, participatory, and learners participatory in various issues, decision making, and even policy formulation. And you'll be surprised how these learners will come up with ideas that at the end of the day will help us in transforming the society. But again, also, there's need also to embrace that approach that is inclusive. You bring all of them on board. And even in this leadership positions or leadership participation, it is good to bring all the learners on board. And inclusion is very, very important. Even the learners with disability should be given a chance to participate in leadership. So I think those are the issues that I needed to raise as far as the recommendations on the policy directions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a question from the floor to Saher, which is, what does youth and community participation look like in the context of transformative education?
That's a very interesting question. I think that we also touched base on it a little bit before, but I think that youth and community participation in transformative education is very crucial, and without them, it's definitely a concept that we cannot efficiently achieve if we'll leave these voices behind. But what it looks like basically is, just as I mentioned, to promote the whole concept of intergenerational equity, where we are giving more seats to the young teachers. I think this is more important when it comes to formal education. When it comes to also the communities, for example, different young people and children as well, but also different communities who have their own set of education techniques, own set of education tools. I think that the policymakers should be should be maybe awareing themselves more about that. This is how I feel, because I think that, for example, there's a lot going on about nature-based solutions, but I think that if I would be the education minister, I would be giving the front seat to some indigenous person, because I think they have the most efficient knowledge that we need at the moment to actually be the best at this whole conversation. So I think this is the role as I see of the young people and communities in the transformative education. We just need to build more meaningful bridges, but the policymakers really have to identify and be open to these bridges, and they have to basically give capacity to people first learn themselves as individuals what they actually mean when they're saying transformative educations. We cannot afford to work in silos. Then also give these capacities and recognize the work that has been going on by different communities and the young people as well, to highlight these voices. This is how I see it, basically, just to enhance and give them. Actually, don't just take decisions and don't make policies for these people. Include them, hear them, and make them a part of these policy making. And just don't make a policy and just say like, here's a policy, do this. Include them. And I think it will be a good policy.
Thank you very much, Saher. We actually have a question for all panelists, and I would like to ask each panelist to reflect very briefly, and then we'll go to our the Slido slides, and we'll reflect on those a little bit as well. But the question to all panelists, and if I could ask each of you to reflect very briefly on it, is: are the policy makers ready? Policymakers must themselves educate themselves on current challenges and the educational needs, the educational tools needed to address them. So in your opinion, Sandra, are policymakers ready?
Interesante pregunta.
It's a very interesting question. Well, the policy makers are faced with such a challenge. Are they ready? Are they not? Well, I do not think they're ready yet. And that was a very honest answer. So I do not think they are ready, not just yet. I think we still have a long way to go. And we need to close the gap, which is quite large. But what's clear is this. To close this gap, well, we need determination, and we do see such a determination. However, fair access is not guaranteed for all. We still have a long way to go. We still have much to do. And that's what I think. And in Peru, we have had many experiences, and based on our experience, I think that we are going towards the right direction. But we need leadership to close the gap, and we need a stronger level of leadership, especially when it comes to access to education. We need to be able to guarantee quality of education. And we need more leadership so that everybody has equal access to education. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your honesty on that. Actually, there's an additional question to Catherine as well, which I will just put together. So the previous question, are the policymakers ready? And there's an assumption in here, which is how can we make policymakers ready? So Catherine, I'd like to ask you to reflect on that a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to my answer, I would like to say that in education or any other sector, the community is very critical. And therefore, the youth and the community must work harmoniously. And the youth is part of the community anyway, so they must all together work harmoniously towards achieving a certain goal. And the youth cannot be ignored in decision making because they form the bulk of the population. Now, over to the issue of policymakers. Are policymakers ready? In my opinion, they should always be ready. Policymakers should always be ready. And when making a policy or when developing a policy, it's normally informed by a problem, which the policymakers need to understand the problem. And the problem can be informed by what is happening in society so that we have the problem at hand. So they should be ready. And this will then be informed by a baseline survey or a desk review that will inform the way forward for the policymakers. How should policymakers be ready? They should be ready by building capacity for the policymakers. They should be ready by reading widely. By the way, policymakers or the policy decision makers are people who are supposed to have a wide scope of ideas of what is happening within them and the world around them. And if they are not ready, then they need to be, their capacity need to be enhanced so that they are ready, so that they are able to deal with problems affecting them in society. But in my opinion, being a policymaker, we are always ready to handle the issues that come along our way. And this is through engaging collaboration, through reading widely, and also through the capacity that is enhanced every other day. Thank you.
Great, thank you, thank you. Saher, are policymakers ready, and how can we make policymakers ready?
Okay, so here comes a very unfiltered answer. I think that the policymakers, just as Catherine mentioned, right? They are ready. They're supposed to be ready all the time because this is basically what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be making the policies. But when it comes to this whole transformative education conversation, I think that we all have to maybe consider and ask ourselves as policymakers and as civil societies as well, what are we actually preparing for? What are we actually ready for? What are we actually doing here? Like, do we actually know what transformative education is, right? Who we want to include, who are the key stakeholders, for example, in this, right? Because I think that Catherine mentioned that the teachers are supposed to be the leaders. They're supposed to be taking the front seat in this. But do the teachers actually know what transformative education means, right? So I think that the first question is, do we actually know what are we doing here, and why are we getting ready for what are we trying, what are we headed to, for example? And I think a more political answer would be yes, of course, this is why we're discussing it. And a more true answer is that we still have a room for learning, like all human beings. Because I'm not that one of those young people who play the blame game. I'm not here to blame any politician, any policymaker, because I recognize that all of us are humans, and with good intentions in this seed, we're trying to make a better change. This is why all of us actually took our time to be a part of this conversation today, right? So I think that there's always a room for learning things and unlearning things. So the policymakers should be asking themselves, okay, hey, maybe we are ready, because this is the discussion which seems to be very crucial to this point of time. But what do we have to learn, and what do we have to learn more?
Great. Thank you very much for that. It's a lively discussion there. And now I would like to just very briefly go to the Slido inputs from our wonderful audience. And I would really like to ask each of you to reflect, but no more than a minute on those slides and some of the key themes that you see there. And with that, I would like to hand the floor to Sandra to reflect on that for 60 seconds.
Claro que sí.
Yes.
¿Cuáles son las inquietudes
So looking at the Slido page, I was able to find out the concerns of the people, what they're concerned about. Especially, they talked about the need for citizen participation, the participation of the civil society, as well as youth participation and participation of stakeholders. So to bring policy change, we need participation of different stakeholders, and they have to really do their job in their own respective positions, and they have to function well, and that is key to make this work. And at the government level, the government should not only stay open to their feedback, but make sure to incorporate that into policy making, and that should be our priority.
Great, thank you very much. And Catherine?
Thank you very much for the insights from Sandra. And to add on that, I'd like to say that one of the policy recommendations moving forward is participation of the youth. Another one is stakeholder engagement. Public participation cannot be ignored in the process of formulating policies. Stakeholder engagement is very, very critical for buy-in. And another one is that policymakers should always be ready, should have their capacity built, because their role in society is very critical. So they should be ready, their capacity should be built, so that they are ready to give direction in problems affecting the society. So youth participation and engagement is very important. Stakeholder engagement is also very important. Capacity building for the stakeholders, for the policymakers particularly, and also for the teachers and community at large. I think those are the insights I would like to give as my parting shot.
Great, thank you very much. And Saher, you have a minute.
Just to clarify, I'm supposed to be talking about these Slido words or phrases that I can see on the screen, right?
Yes, if you can.
Yeah,
please.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. So I mean, I really love the way that it's written, or the audience is recognizing the importance of diverse roundtables with youth stakeholders and policymakers. I think that my major takeaway from this whole session has been that there is hope because we are on the same page. There is hope because we are recognizing that we have to be making policies. Policymakers should be ready and everything, but also not excluding people while we're making these policies. So we're not excluding the young people, or we're not excluding different stakeholders, the indigenous people and people who matter outside the classrooms as well, and these policies that affect them. So I think that this is what I really have faith in, and I really hope that this gets implemented as well, and we're not just discussing it somehow. And yeah, so my major hope for all of these suggestions would be to get implemented. And I really love the idea of I think it was practical actions. So just as I mentioned, there are a lot of practical actions and examples on those which we can I'm sorry, which we can learn from the young people that they have been doing locally, and
Right.
a lot of key stakeholders that they have been doing locally. So I think that those are my favorite ones, but other ones I also love them. I think that we should implement all of them. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And just to summarize the wonderful points that have been emerging from these discussions from our amazing panelists and our experts and audiences, that we need a value-based education system. We need to build in citizen participation tools. We need to ramp up ICTs and build capacity in curriculum developers and get youth participation actively in the school. To build capacity within teachers, and of course to make policymakers more ready to deal with these challenges. And I think that really outlines the complexity of the issue, but also the hope that we have for making a difference. Because as you rightly put it, Sarah, it at least helps that we're on similar pages with respect to the challenges and what needs to happen. We've had some wonderful discussions. I really would like to thank our wonderful panelists for all your contributions. This has been a fantastic, and congratulations to everyone, and looking forward to the outcomes of this conference, which no doubt these discussions, these rich discussions, have contributed to massively. So with that, I thank everyone, and we bring this session to a close.